Welcome back to Good Employment Chatter podcast. Today we have a very special guest on the podcast as we focus once again on leadership issues. I'm delighted to be joined by John Herring, who's the Director of Organisational Development and Culture at NHS Greater Manchester Integrated Care. That's quite a title, John. He's also a Charter Board member, but perhaps more importantly for our chat today is that John was also recognised as this year's Good Employment Leader of the Year at the recent Good Employment Awards. So John, welcome to the Chatter podcast.
Thank you.
Leader of the Year, tell me about that, John. How did that feel and what did it mean to you? And perhaps, importantly, the NHS colleagues, for you to be recognised like that.
Yeah, so I think I said a few words at the award ceremony, and I think I said it's the first thing I've won since I got my 25-metre swimming badge, and you know, as much as that is amusing, that there's a real truth to that in the sense that I'm not necessarily a big kind of awards kind of putter-inner, as it were. So often in the NHS in particular, we'll have a number of awards and you put yourself forward for these awards. I think the power of this award was that I didn't have a clue that I'd been put forward, and that it was kind of chosen, it's the board and the mayor and that kind of stuff that has real power to it. I mean, it has real meaningfulness. So that was amazing. I think it's very hard for me to say what impact it has on colleagues across health and care. They can speak to that. I think it's a vindication for how we as a team in NHS Greater Manchester approached good employment and the importance of it in our sector. And I think it's a vindication of what I choose to be my leadership style, and that means a lot.
Yeah, I mean you thoroughly deserved it, John, because over the last 12, 18 months you've completely championed good employment through the NHS, through its various trials and tribulations, because it's not an easy ride in the NHS at the moment, as we know. No. But the focus that you provided and the leadership you provided, I think has been exceptional, and it's made an impact. Moreover, I think that's the important thing for us, that we actually saw lots of NHS organisations and related organisations coming forward, embracing the agenda and making a difference to people's lives. So it was well deserved.
Thank you.
I'm sure your colleagues are very proud of you at the NHS. They should be. John, you've been a great supporter of the Charter's work from the outset, and particularly on equality and leadership issues. And I'm sure we'll come back to the importance of how we address inclusion from positions of leadership in our conversation. But you've also contributed to our work and resources around leadership, particularly around cultures. And I'm looking forward to exploring that with you today. However, we also want to kind of peel back a few layers of the onion on you, and some personal experiences that we can understand how you've built your leadership profile and understand what makes you tick. So for the first main question today, all right, I need you to cast your mind back to the first moment that you realised that you were actually leading. Now that could have been anything. It doesn't have to be in a work setting. So what did that? Tell me about it.
Gosh, that's a good question. So probably the first time was aged 15, and this might sound like an amazing achievement. Genuinely, it's not. But I was made head boy, and I went to a really kind of difficult school. So
Where was this, John?
It was Clarendon Park High. It got called Windsor High later, so it was in the centre of Salford, next to the precinct. And, it's a really poor area. It was one of the worst schools in the country at the time. So, the fact that I wore a shirt and a pair of trousers probably meant I got head boy.
Okay.
And one of the jobs of head boy and head girl was to make sure the prefects were on the doors of the various entrances to the school during break time. And, that was impossible. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, physically impossible. We tried on the first couple of days. You get your collar felt, for want of a better term. Mm-hmm. And because, of course, there was still a year above us when they were going through their GCSEs. It's funny I've just picked that one out because it was a total failure of leadership. But it was a failure of leadership around us, I think, asking 15-year-old kids to try and manage 16-year-old kids who were, in a very difficult school. So, but it probably taught me a lot about you can have a great plan.
Okay.
But the context in which you find yourself is really important, and being able to persuade and influence people is absolutely vital.
What did it feel like being made head boy? Were you scared? Were you imposter syndrome even then? Should I be here?
I don't even think I got to that. I was like, oh God, I've become visible. Because becoming visible in a school like that is if you're not a fighter, and I wasn't a fighter, I was good at sport, so it got me out of some of the bullying, and I was academically good. But ultimately, my tactic was to hide, because that way you don't end up in the.
If you're good at sport, sometimes you pop up in a school.
Yeah, well, it protected me from being bullied because I was good on the sports team and I was a decent level. So there was a protection there.
What, was this football or?
So we didn't do a lot of football at school, which is absolutely bizarre for a city centre Salford school. We did basketball, rugby league, which I was good at. I was really good at. Dennis Betts and Darren Betts went to our school, so we had history in rugby. But so I was really good at those sports, and yeah.
Did that not, was there not leadership through the sports stuff?
No, because I was hiding.
Okay.
I think I only discovered, and I think this bit is really important to understand where people are at in their local communities, where they come from. If you're thinking about your workforce, the lessons we're taught. I would only started to shine probably in my mid-20s as a leader, mid to late 20s. I started to realise, there might be. Because I didn't have to hide anymore for safety reasons. This is about like personal safety and psychological safety in a community. So sometimes it's important to recognise where people are coming from and why they might choose to hide.
No, I get that. So into a work context. Listen, tell me about your first job, first of all.
So I went. Job? Yeah, so I went to uni. Well, my first job was age 10. So my dad was
that sounds illegal already.
Yeah, well, it was illegal actually, but not quite as bad as you think. My dad collected pool coupons, so for the younger members of the audience, this was like the lottery, but based around football. Yeah. And my dad was a lot older when he had me, and he worked till he was 84. So he had a pools round in central Salford, which was also quite dangerous, collecting money. And then when I was 10, I got on my bike and I started collecting pools coupons. Okay. I probably shouldn't have done that because 18 is the threshold for that. So, but, I learned quite a lot kind of doing that job. I worked in Woolworths, I worked in Tesco's. We were quite a poor family, so even when I was at university, I had to do 2 or 3 jobs to keep us going because we didn't have any money. So my first proper job, if you want to call it a proper job and full-time job, I left university, I did a molecular biology degree and decided that test tubes wasn't the way forward and made a rather bizarre decision at the time, or you might say a strengths decision, that actually I was probably better with people than I was with science. I did well at science, but So I went and I became a support worker for MenCap.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first job. And for 5 years I did support work with people with learning disabilities, mental health, stroke rehab, and studied to become a psychotherapist.
Fantastic. And what did the leadership around you there teach you?
I think what I learned was some structural stuff, like how to build rotas. I mean, this stuff is important to people, you know, how to protect people's weekends or whatever, you know, how to look after them in the building of rotas. Not that I was doing it, but I was watching it and I was learning how it was done badly. I think the other thing is really attaching people to why. And a lot of this experience was built out of bad experience, I've got to be honest, you know. So learning about why we did things with the service users we supported was, I felt, really important, as opposed to just do it that way. Because there wasn't a kind of an encouraging of curiosity. And you know, what I saw was bad things happen in care when people at the front line aren't able to speak up, they aren't able to say, I wonder why we might be doing this.
Just for context, John, when was this? 90s. Yeah.
90s, yeah.
So,
Mid to late 90s, yeah.
I can remember what happened to public finances during the 90s.
Absolutely.
Difficult times.
Yeah, and we had the care in the community, so we had a lot of people coming out of institutions. And, you know, the best organisations I worked for at the time, they were local authorities. You were able to speak up and say, I'm not sure this person's benefiting from this, or I wonder if we could do something different, or, you know, you could be curious, you could enter into a conversation. And sure enough, those services were celebrated. I'm not kicking the NHS here, but those NHS services, my experience was different, and they often ended up being not celebrated, but bad outcomes happen for people.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah.
And back to you, were people around you going, John's going places, we need to support John, or were you just a cog in the wheel?
I was a cog in the wheel.
Well, yeah.
I was a cog in the wheel, and I did my psychotherapy training, and I decided, I think at that point I'd kind of decided I needed to, I don't know how conscious it was, to become a leader or whatever. I needed to find something that enabled me to provide more leadership. So
go on, what's the spark for that, John?
Well, I was brought up, I think I've referenced my dad. My dad was massive believer in education. He was a leader himself. He taught at Salford University. He worked at Farmer Norton's. He was a production engineer. But the reason we were really poor is his biggest mistake was he set up an engineering company during the winter of discontent in the late 70s. Yeah. Lost all his money. We ended up, and he had to pay it all back. The days of bankruptcy weren't there. So, and it was his honour to pay it all back. So we were incredibly poor. But he had a lot of social capital because of his background. So he was the chair of governors of my local school. He was on the governors of another local school. He was involved in community leadership. So he was a kind of amazing example to follow. And so I had that influence and that encouragement. And even though he didn't understand why I'd gone into the sector I'd gone into. And so in the end, I went to Liverpool to get involved in a charity for homeless people that worked in night time. Very quickly, the manager of that charity, it was only just setting up, left. And I just threw my hat in the ring and said, I think I can run this. I know how to build rotas. I know how to... It was a massive learning curve, I have to say. But that was where I cut my teeth early doors as a leader.
That's fantastic. I love the fact that your dad, in a way, was an inspiration, almost mentor, I guess.
Yeah, totally.
For you.
Yeah.
And that's so important as we kind of take people on leadership journeys. They need someone to aspire to sometimes, don't they?
Yeah, because I always think that I'm driven by kind of social justice and equality, as you referenced, and I think I looked at my peers who grew up in that school that I referenced, and they weren't stupid. They're just as clever as me, but they lacked that role model. They didn't have that role model, and that for many of them it led to a life of crime or not achieving their full potential. I was really lucky. My dad was the reason that I kind of got saved from that. Otherwise, I would have been in a similar position, I think.
So, driven by culture and values,
Yeah.
clearly,
Yeah.
and that's come through in your leadership style. But for organisations that kind of flounder around that,
Yeah.
how do you cultivate that from a leadership position? How do you cultivate those values across an organisation?
So there's a couple of things I'd say is if you haven't got them or you've not thought about them, co-create them with your staff. Really attach them to what you're about. You know, what are you here to do? Why are you here as an organisation? Why are you here? And it can't be to be the best widget maker in the world or whatever. It can't be. It's got to be bigger than that. I always think there's a really good, Simon Sinek, I think, has done some great work on what he calls a just cause. And he has 5 rules for a just cause. And I probably won't be able to quote them straight off the bat now. But I would encourage people to read that, because that is your vision. You know, make sure it's in service of something other than just yourself or making money or being the best. It can't be that. Make sure it's infinite. You can't achieve it. It's ambitious. It drives you. And I think then your values and your behaviours come from that. They're in service of that ultimately. So I'd encourage you to co-create them with the staff, looking at, you know, what are we in service of here? Why are we here? The second thing I'd say, which I think is really important, is values are tested when times are tough. So it's easy to talk about values when things are easy, you know, and things are comfortable. But when times are tough, that's the test of your values. And that's the time you should be reflecting on them. And you'll soon get a measure for, are you parking them at the door to then have a discussion amongst leaders or with your staff because it's difficult, or are you still holding to them?
Sure.
And if you're doing the latter, then that's amazing, and that'll be felt, and I think that creates change. But if you're doing the former, you're fastly going to find that people will find that you're hypocritical, I suppose, around those
you're
values.
You're paying lip service to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they get weaponised against organisations as well, which is the worst thing. So you might have compassion as a value, and staff will go, oh, really compassionate working here. Yeah. You'll get all of those statements coming out, and that is a real problem when that starts.
Now, I mentioned earlier about inclusion, and you know what I think one of the biggest challenges for Greater Manchester is around inclusion and diversity, particularly in leadership roles.
Yeah.
And I know it's a passion of yours.
Yeah.
And you know you've worked tirelessly through your career in the NHS to address that. So, top tips: how do organisations get their heads around what they need to do? So,
I'm going to use the civil unrest as an example because I think it's a powerful example, and it's something me and the team at the moment that I work with are really looking at. And we think in the civil unrest there are 3 things to look at, and I think there's lessons in that then for the wider inclusion agenda. So the first thing is that civil unrest has created trauma in people who, you know, maybe were around in the 80s when there was the rise of the National Front and stuff like that, or even older. So and it's created a sense of threat and horror, and we have to engage with it and listen to it and not deny it. So engaging with people's lived experience, listening to it actively, and thinking about how you as an organisation can help with that. And help, you know, there might be actions you can take within what you listen to address some of those issues in your own organisation. That is really important. That can't stand on its own, though. Even if you're building great action plans that might be about recruitment and race equality or access and disability, that's great. But it doesn't stand on its own. I think the second thing specific, I think, to the civil unrest is we shouldn't forget the 3 children who lost their lives and the community who was terribly affected. It got hijacked. And, you know, something I know we as a team is like, who have we not heard from? Well, we've not heard from that. And, you know, we live in a city where a bomb went off and you know, devastated a number of lives, young lives. So there may be people in our team or in our organisation who are affected by that. That shouldn't be silenced. So sometimes thinking about who am I not hearing from, and where are we not getting those stories is really important. The third bit, I think, is the bit that, if I was speaking to Andy Burnham or any of the politicians, I've said it to them. I think it's really important for them, but I think it's important for those of us who are leading in organisations. Is about cohesion. Mm-hmm. So you cannot, as Audre Lorde said, dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. So what I mean by that is, if what we do is listen to people who are disenfranchised because of their race or their sexuality or their age, and we just listen to that and try and create change there, we are working again in this kind of polarity where it's like we just do that, it becomes black and white, it becomes this or that. And that doesn't create change. In some cases that festers, and it has done in the communities that we serve. How do we link people up to have real empathy for each other's lived experience? And I think as organisations you can create those conversations, and I know some of this for some people will feel superfluous to the delivery of whatever they're delivering, but actually if you want to create a cohesive teams are based around really good empathy, really good understanding of one another. And this at a bigger level is the challenge for us as a society and for politicians, is to this culture of division that's been created through social media. It's been fueled by social media, actually. We've got to find a way to address that, because people, once they start to connect with one another, will start to come in from the extremes, and we'll start to think, oh, that doesn't look fair, that doesn't sound fair, and most people are fair-minded. And then we start to address things collectively rather than solely just in these kind of lines of like race equality, sexuality equality.
It's a huge challenge, isn't it? Because many of the arguments turn into binary ones now.
Yeah.
And most people define themselves against something rather than for something.
Absolutely.
So it's how do we manage that through the kind of culture of leadership that you're talking about. I think the profile of leaders in Greater Manchester ain't great. When you look at diversity, and we talk about allyship and we talk about mentorship. And, I mean, will they solve this, John?
Well, I think it goes back to my last point, which is, so where are you creating spaces in your organisation? You might have an inclusion staff network. How do you link that up so that people have got an appreciation for what it means to grow up in a Bangladeshi community, or grow up as neurodiverse, or as white working class? What does it mean for you? You've all got a cultural background.
Sure.
So how are you creating those conversations in your organisation, which becomes bigger than just a single allyship? I think allyship's important, by the way, but what that empathy does is it begins to go, oh, I might have an appreciation for why it might be difficult for my disabled colleague to access the building. So instead of me having to think, oh, now I have to think about this, well, actually I talked to Jim and he found it difficult, and I have an appreciation for why he is struggling, and therefore I might then begin to be an ally and take action. So it's a lot more purposeful. It's about connecting people around their lived experience. And yes, I think as leaders we have a responsibility to be curious and open for the totality of the experience in our organisation and listen carefully to all of it. Sometimes it's about a balancing act as well, because equality is an interesting one, because equality rubs up. One person's rights can sometimes subjugate another person's rights. Those kind of things can become very difficult. But it's only through listening and connecting people and creating empathy that we can then lead with allyship, and then go, actually, I do have an appreciation because I've had some personal conversations. I might have been part of the reciprocal mentoring scheme, where I've connected with a frontline worker with a particular protected characteristic as a leader, and I've got a bit more of that curiosity and openness.
So, taking from that, John, communications and listening are key aspects of any leader's...
And curiosity, openness.
You need to develop those skills, and you need to be able to find your position of leadership in a way that allows that to happen.
Yeah, and this might be controversial, and of course, as an ex-psychotherapist, you would expect me to say this. You've got to do work on yourself as a leader, and stuff that, makes you defensive. And you need to work on that, because you need to find a way of being open to that, not in threat mode when people bring things up, so that you can make considered decisions, so that you can really listen, you can be open, you can be curious, you can make the best of the staff team that's around you. So if a staff member comes to you asking for a pay rise and you're not sure they're worth it, then sometimes we get very defensive and judgmental about that. And you might want to be curious about why they came to you, what was going on for them. It doesn't mean that you agree with people. I mean, I think some of this goes to the heart of the matter of when we were saying about social media. It's not a black and white thing. It doesn't mean you agree with people on stuff. It's about you being open to listen, consider, wonder why. All of that is good data for you to then make good decisions. I'm
going to play this back to you, John. What your position as a leader?
Yeah.
You're not a square jaw kind of guy out there.
No.
You lead from behind.
Absolutely, yeah. We've just had a team meeting. I've come here from a team meeting. I do not chair our staff team meetings. The chair is rotated. It's really important we all learn chairing skills. It gives people an opportunity to do that. They build the agenda. To imagine that as a leader you've got the best ideas is so delusional. Yeah. It's like, I have a team full of really talented people who have got great ideas. Part of it is to enable them to speak up, to chair meetings, to be active, to take on responsibility. Obviously, I've got accountability at the end of the day, and sometimes I may have to say, well, I'm accountable for this, so I wonder how we work on this. But 99% of the time, my starting point is how do we do this together?
Sure. Yeah, definitely get that. Now, over the last 4 years, the world of work's turned on its head, and all sorts of challenges, particularly around engagement. So what lessons do you think around employee engagement of leaders? Perhaps almost forgotten already from the days of COVID.
So there's a few things. I think we have to be more purposeful now. But that doesn't mean that we were great at it before COVID. No. So let me make this clear. That I think there's a bit of a delusion that somehow office working was the solution to, making sure that people were pulling their weight or making sure that people were engaged. People were still shopping on Amazon in offices. In offices pre-COVID, and would turn up, stick their headphones in and not be engaged with the workplace. So I think we do have to be purposeful, and we did before, but the environment's a bit different now, so I accept that. I think it's important that teams come together, that you bring them together face to face. I think that that is important, but it needs to be purposeful. So you need to be clear about why you're bringing them together. If you've got a data analyst who spends all of their time working on spreadsheets 9 to 5, they're going to go, well, why am I coming into the office? Because I could do this at home. So you've got to give them a purpose, and some of that purpose is about you coming together as a team, creating solutions together, but it makes your time much more focused on the things that you can only do together, and then you can focus on the other stuff at home. For those of you, workplaces, and there are plenty of them, where home working hasn't changed, people are in, I would still encourage you to, because often in those workplaces, people are focused on the delivery of the work. 24/7, whether it's construction or it's the front line of the NHS. People still need time to reflect on the work they've done, think and consider the impact that that's had on them, the improvements that you can make, different things they can do. So you still need to create that time for people to do those things, whether they're, cleaning a ward, building a hospital, and I'm using health terms,
but it's fine.
That those things, where are you creating that time for people to do that work? Because that's where your engagement happens, on the things that are relevant to them.
No, I think in all workplaces we can account for pounds and pence, but we really don't account time in the same way.
No.
we just put everybody's nose to the wheel and expect them.
Yeah.
I take the view that probably a third of your time is taken up with stuff that happens in every workplace.
Yeah.
There's probably a third of the time that you don't know what you're going to do yet, but you'll do it because it's coming. So it gives you a third of your time to actually do your job.
Yeah.
And if you lead that way, or think about it, manage that way,
Yeah.
then it gives people space.
Definitely.
It creates it when you're planning businesses. So yeah, leading from the back, interesting. Maybe that's the new way to go forward.
Get out of people's way.
Yeah, absolutely. So yourself, I mean, it's a high pressure job you've got, John. I mean, I read out your title. That's impressive, isn't it? But how do you look after yourself? What do you do for your own mental health and well-being?
I think in work it is about creating the culture that I've talked about. Personally, I think that does something to look after your mental health.
That purposefulness.
Yeah, and the humility as well. That, you know, we had a discussion that, you know, just using our... So we have a senior meeting and then we have a all-staff meeting. And we split it up because the business is different, and you know that's what the staff asked for. I didn't split it up; the staff asked for that. So that's how we've built it. And in the senior meeting, we were doing a bit of consideration of a piece of work that we're doing that I'm leading on. And what protects my mental health? The fact that I could say I'm not sure about this. I'm struggling a bit with this. What do people think? And you know, another member of staff kind of, at the time, doing some real reflective thinking and saying, I think you should be doing this, and I think that's what you've said, and you're on the right track. And so we're supporting one another really in a collegiate way. So setting up that ability to reflect, think, and deliver together is a real protector to your mental health. It is for me, but then I know I'm driven in that way as a leader, and people will be driven differently. I think reflecting on, because I'm driven that way, and if what I would encourage people out there to think about is how are you driven? So I'm driven more by people than anything else. Now there's a pro and con to that, and the con is sometimes that I might care far too much about what people might think. I might delay my decision making in order to get everyone on board and things like that. It's about being really aware of the cost, the shadow side of whatever your great strength is or your great belief is, and really giving yourself the space to reflect on that. I have a coach, so I can use that coaching space to kind of think about that in particular. Where am I overplaying?
Is your
my
coach
strength?
in sector, John, or elsewhere?
No, outside.
No. Good.
Outside, yeah. So, that kind of space, where are your allies? Where are your people who you can go and reflect with? Maybe, as you've just kind of indicated, who aren't within the weeds of where you work. And, having that awareness of where are my real strengths. You might be somebody who's a real big decision maker, powerful leader, front of the pack, all of that kind of stuff. There is a strength to that. There's definitely a strength to that in crisis work and stuff like that. There is a shadow side to it as well. So it's giving you, because you will come up against stuff that impacts on your well-being as a result of your preferred style, and you need to create space to reflect on that. The obvious stuff is, and you'll see this everywhere about, and I'm no good at it, but anyway, getting good sleep, exercising, all that stuff.
But you've got some community interests, I know.
Yeah.
Club and stuff.
Yeah. So, and I mean, yes, and it's more work. So yeah, I chair an arts charity. I'm involved in a fan-owned football club in FC United. And I love all of that. And so again, if you're doing that, is it giving you energy?
Yeah.
Because there is a payoff for volunteering.
And it's a release. No?
I think chairing a charity and doing people and culture work at a football club is fascinating for me, and I love it, and it does actually give me energy. It's actually doing more of the same work.
Stuff.
So, I could be accused of just doing more busman's holidays. If that gives you energy, if you love what you do, which I clearly must do at some level, then keep doing it. That's fine. I think where it's costing you energy, and it will do at some point, you know, that's the point to have a think about, am I getting the balance right? Should I be distracting myself with other things, or because distraction is useful, or should I be doing other things? Yeah.
Okay, thanks, John. We're coming to the end, but before we finish, I've got one more question.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting one. And I'm sure your day is pretty full, wall to wall with meetings and stuff, but imagine that someone cancels a meeting when you've got an hour free. And you can nip down to a coffee bar and you can meet any leader, past or present, for an hour. Who would you like to meet up with?
Wow. I wasn't expecting that question.
No, well, that's why it's a good question.
That's why it's a good question. Any leader, past or present. You know, there's a bit of me that, like anybody, I think, who's asked this question, who wants to find someone new for people to kind of look into and look at. And I'm going to fail abysmally, I think, because I'm kind of reflecting through. You know what, I'm going to go for someone slightly different. I think I'd be really interested to talk to somebody like Emmeline Pankhurst, somebody who worked in the social movements that changed the nature of how we live and work, you know. People who started up the trade unions, people who fought for suffrage, back to Peterloo. Because there's something for me about how we influence people for the greater good, and, you know, bring movements of people along with us. So, yeah.
Wouldn't it be great to talk to Emmeline Pankhurst and say, we've got social media.
Yeah.
So how are you going to use the tools that we've got today to achieve your social purpose?
Yeah, with the supplanted knowledge of what it's like, you know. Because I think she'd have to go through a whole load of mistakes like we've all had. But yeah, absolutely, yeah. You know, how did she create that movement? Was it conscious? Yeah. There's a picture in the People's History Museum that always, I do love photographs that capture a moment, and there's two police officers carrying off this suffragette, and the kind of defiance and what's happening to the crowd around. It's just it's such a powerful image. But yeah, how do you create those? Because it's often those movements, even in organisations and in work, that then create change. You know, you can have a bolt-on plan. I say this to people, and still we work on plans, and that is important. You've got to have a bolt-on plan and a process and stuff like that. But if we do not do work on the people around us to carry our plans forward, then invariably they're less successful than they could be.
And understand how flexible you've got to be, I guess.
Definitely.
Because you've got to respond and react to things around you. You can create movements, I think. You're great. John, as always, it's been wonderful to spend time in your company.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks for sharing so candidly. I hope our listeners found your experiences insightful as I did. Thanks for coming on the podcast and for all your support for the Charter.
Thank you.
John.